Adventure Time is filled with episodes that can be described as somewhat eerie. Some are more obvious than others, as episodes like Blank-Eyed Girl or No One Can Hear You are pretty open about their intent to creep you out, while others like Goliad or The Food Chain are only unsettling if one thinks about the implications or themes of that episode. But out of all 283 plus outings of the franchise, none perhaps feels as inherently uncomfortable as Season 5, Episode 5, All the Little People. An episode that, in such an interesting and surreal way, fully captures the thoughts and the tendencies of a 14-year-old Finn, and that's what we're talking about today. In this video, we're going to go through the somehow over 10-year-old episode and talk about all the ways that it unsettles the viewer on its way to highlight the flaws of its maturing protagonist, ultimately foreshadowing all the ways that those flaws will come back to haunt him later in the series.
Get in line, ladies. This rainicorn thing can't last forever. I didn't mean that.
Before even getting past the title card, we get a little piece of lore for the episode, as we see Magic Man creating the titular figures that he's about to give Finn, something that we'll get into the implications of a little bit later. Anyway, before he shows up in the episode, we open up to a ridiculously great shot of our protagonist duo on a hill, a shot especially impressive for being in the first half of the series. The conversation that follows as Magic Man's in the foreground, sees Finn asking Jake about whether or not you can predict how good of a pairing two people will be solely based on their respective qualities. Something that Jake refutes on the basis of him seeing it as more of a loose, you like who you like kind of thing. While they continue to talk about the idea of being able to pair people up before they even meet each other, with Finn using BMO and the Ice King as an example, Magic Man speaks his only 2 lines in the episode as he attaches a bag to Finn and disappears back into the ground. And you can probably guess that I'm going to spend a good chunk of time just talking about these 2 pieces of dialogue. First up, Magic Man says this to the toys.
Do what thou will be the whole piece of law.
BMO and Ice King?
This line is a slight rephrasing of one of the key axioms of Thelema, a religion/cult started by a ceremonial magician in the 1900s, and while I know that sounds like a lot, very long story short, he's basically telling the toys in a very Magic Man way that they should discover their own destiny or true will, an incantation that is what presumably brings the toys to life. Magic Man's second line here is one that has a very literal meaning for the first 10 or so minutes of the episode, but becomes immensely more interesting by the end. But for now, this line pretty much just means that we're not going to see him again in the next quarter hour.
I'm not coming back.
You're creeping me out.
Eventually, as our boys head back to the treehouse, they discover their new possession, a bag that contains a collection of miniature versions of various characters in the show, with the only caveats being that they speak in a sim type of language, and that they are seemingly unable to see or hear anything besides each other. As the pair, and mostly Finn, continue to experiment with them, he gets further and further entrenched in the little people, eventually ignoring everything else, including the meal that Jake has prepared. Based on just the tiny little interactions that he sees, such as just Lady and PB having a conversation, Finn begins to construct narratives about what they could possibly be talking about, something that continues to freak his brother out. Throughout every scene in this episode that involves the little guys, the fantastically composed soundtrack consists almost entirely of eerie notes from a piano. As Finn gets deeper and deeper and deeper into a hole he finds himself eventually unable to climb back out of. Before moving on to the rest of the episode, let's take a quick moment to talk about the atmosphere and just the general vibe of this one, as everything comes together to genuinely create one of the most unique feeling 11 minutes of the franchise. It's a combination of a few different things, from the aforementioned piano creepily stringing together notes in the background, to the lack of a black outline making the little people truly feel like they belong in a different dimension, to just the generally Twilight Zone-esque plot. This episode is so surreal from start to finish, as every scene mashes together Adventure Time goofiness with some uncomfortable imagery that elicits elicits such a weird feeling that doesn't exist anywhere else in the series. Eventually, after Finn gets obsessed with the word chemistry when Jake uses it to describe a relationship between some of the little people, the pair go off to bed. But Finn is, predictably, unable to sleep. Instead, he waits for his brother to doze off, a sign that, even if he doesn't know why, he does know that what he's about to do is wrong. While the extent of Finn's meddling in the lives of the little people was limited to just giving Ice King a set of drums before this point, under the blankets, Finn begins to intervene in the lives of his new possessions. First, fairly innocently pairing LSP and Mr. Cupcake, before immediately taking it a step further, making sure that Jake is still snoozing as he swaps out little LSP for Lady, and forces little Jake to watch as the pair kiss. There's a moment of hesitation as Finn decides whether or not to subject even a little version of his best friend to the vision of his partner kissing another guy, but since at the beginning of the episode, Jake jokingly referred to the possibility of the pair not lasting forever, the idea of wanting to know how it would play out was likely still rumbling around in Finn's 14-year-old head. So, of course, when given the opportunity to find out, he takes it. By the time Jake wakes up, he walks in on a restless Finn, who has spent all night making a town out of books for the little people to live in while he continues to play with their lives. Lives that have completely diverted from those of their counterparts, as off-screen meddling has left little Jake completely alone, and a bunch of characters and relationships that range from kind of odd to pretty jacked up. And perhaps none are quite as bad as Finn setting little Finn up with Lady, something that Jake obviously can't just get over even when Finn reiterates that they're just toys. Even though he just claims to be messing with the little people, Finn's desire to manipulate and play matchmaker is also affecting his big person life, as Jake goes to Lady's house for a bit to clear his mind from the monstrosity he just saw his brother commit. Meanwhile, we get the longest sequence in the episode of Finn interacting with the toys, and it is by far the most interesting. Once Finn gets bored of watching himself be with Lady, he sets little Finn up with Flame Princess, as he recreates his current relationship. But that can only last for so long, as despite being happily with the little version of his current girlfriend, Finn decides he wants more. He eventually brings Princess Bubblegum into the mix, and nudges her and Finn until they begin to kiss as well, starting a fight for Finn's affection between her and the other two ladies, something that Finn shamefully blushes at as he sees little versions of real people that he knows fight over him. In just about 15 hours, Finn has gone from curiosity to fascination to obsession, as he sees the massive amount of impact he can have by meddling with the lives of others. A time jump later that's likely not as long as the card implies, and Jake comes back to discover things in an even worse state than before. The treehouse, along with Finn, are in beyond rough states, as he watches the destroyed lives of all the little people. All the relationships that Finn has set up have either fallen apart or devolved into complete chaos, all while little Finn stands atop a book, looking off into the distance and wondering where it all went wrong. By trying to play matchmaker, partially just to see what would happen in certain scenarios, Finn has doomed both a little version of himself and all of that little version's closest friends. At this point, Jake tries to big brother the situation, but when he tries to take all the little people back to the hill, he is stopped by Finn, who demands that he get a chance to fix his mistake. As he tries to begin to do this, we get a look into the reality of the little people for the first time in the episode, only to find little Finn on the same hill from the beginning, finding himself not understanding relationships in the same way as his regular-sized counterpart. The reveal that the little people are beings in another dimension that Finn is manipulating in a godlike way is one that the characters never figure out. But as the audience, we begin to understand that everything we've just seen Finn do in the last 11 minutes actually happened to the characters, just not the characters that we know and love. In the context of Fiona and Cake's expansion of the multiverse, you can make an argument that, in creating these toys, Magic Man has somehow linked them to a different universe, but in reality, I'm very confident that the Adventure Time crew was not looking that far ahead. Anyway, eventually, through the Adventure Timing solution of Shakenum, Finn finds a way to communicate with the little guy, as he explains through a cloud representation of himself that he caused all of this conflict, explaining the same thing to Lady FP and Princess Bubblegum, ending both conversations with a line that should sound pretty familiar.
Okay, goodbye! I'm not coming back!
I'm not coming back.
We'll get back to that in a minute, but first, as the episode ends, Finn suggests the little people throw a dance party, and as they do, we get one final callback to the conversation at the beginning of the episode.
Oh, flip! Look who's hitting it off with the Ice King!
In the litany of things that make this episode stand out in the context of the rest of the series, I think one of the strongest is the idea that, unlike most episodes of the show, this one doesn't teach the characters as much as it teaches the audience about the characters, and more specifically about Finn, and by extension, a little bit about Magic Man. While we get to see and understand Finn's tendency to lean towards manipulation in a way that we hadn't quite seen anywhere else in the series, he doesn't exactly learn much from this experience, as only a few dozen episodes after this, Finn once again causes a fight for his own enjoyment, this one between big people and having much more severe consequences. But while I think that it's fairly easy to see that this episode's overall moral is about not manipulating your friends or trying to control their emotions, what I really want to talk about are the parallels between Magic Man and Finn in this episode, best hinted at by them sharing the line about not coming back. In this episode, Magic Man gives Finn a taste of the power that he holds, allowing him pretty much infinite control over people in the same way that Magic Man has. And even though Finn is on the exact opposite side of the hero scale, especially for Magic Man's characterization at this point in the series, it ends up having the same results: chaos and destruction. From just an initial desire to, quote, see what would happen, Finn's experiments quickly dive into surrealist, nightmarish horror, watching as his friends' miniatures' lives fall apart because of his actions. The idea that magic, or power in a less broad sense, causes characters to slowly grow crazy and callous is something that's all over Adventure Time. And even though Finn doesn't gain any powers in this episode, when he gains the ability to exercise power over a group of people, it's close enough to bring him to that edge. As we get to watch Finn grow up, with his relationships getting more and more complex, we get to watch him make a series of horrible decisions, a lot of which going back to this idea of Finn's manipulative tendencies as explored in this episode. But something that we don't get to see in All the Little People is that Finn genuinely grows out of this. While it's at its worst in seasons 5 and 6, by the end of the show, the nearly adult Finn of the final few seasons is perfectly fine just letting people do as they wish and going along for the ride. And if given another opportunity, would likely treat All the Little People quite a bit differently. Anyway, that's about it for me. If you want to see my opinions on animation that are somehow worse than the ones expressed in video form, my Twitter is hidden somewhere in the description. But either way, this has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in about a week for some more Kevin. Thanks for watching.